What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and yes, we should be doing the Police Academy retrospective, but we're not, due to illness and, let's say, scheduling conflicts. We haven't been able to get together to complete that, but we will be back to complete our Police Academy retrospective. However, I didn't want to let you down, and there is another episode. I was going to put this as a bonus, so let's just slot it in there. Recently, I had the good fortune of meeting with Dan Abnett, comic writer, and artist INJ Culbard, to talk about their series that they have been doing in the pages of British sci-fi anthology comic 2000 AD. Their comic is called Brink, or their series is called Brink. They've done their 5 books. The 5th book is now out in paperback from 2000 AD.com and other sellers you can find on Amazon and everywhere else. I recommend it. We talk about the book, we talk about the art, and we talk about the influences, and wider things as well. We talk about all of the little bits of interest as well. So, for now, I'm going to hand this over. This is me interviewing with Dan Abnett and INJ Culbard. Enjoy and have a Merry, Merry Christmas. Okay, guys, here we are then. I am here with INJ Culbard and Dan Abnett to talk about Brink. They are 4 books in. Well, 5 books, technically, because the 5th book has been released within 2008 and is now available from Rebellion. I am 4 books in, I should say. I've read the first 4 books, and I will be getting the 5th book. So I want to talk about Brink, but first and foremost, let me introduce them. And I know he doesn't like being called Ian, so I'm going to call him Culbard.
Yeah.
for the purposes of this interview. And we have spoken relatively recently. But Culbard, how are you doing? Are you good?
Thank you. Good, thank you.
Good.
You?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you two on a Thursday evening, so I'm quite happy. Yes, we talked about Salamadre, and we talked about a lot of things on that podcast as well. So, and you're back to talk about Brink. But Dan, you are new to 20th Century Geek. So, if you want to introduce yourself to those few that may not know you of my audience.
My name is Dan Abnett. I am a writer of novels, comics, the occasional computer game, and other stuff. It has been suggested that I changed my name by deed poll to the prolific Dan Abnett because I write a lot of stuff.
Yes,
and I indeed do write a lot of stuff. And I've worked with Ian now on a number of different projects. We first collaborated on New Edwardians for Vertigo. Did a series of Dark Horse. Been doing did Wild's End for Boom.
10 years ago we did that first.
10 years ago. And obviously Brink for 2000 AD. We did Brink actually because we'd enjoyed working together so much on American books. And but we both worked for 2000 AD but separately. And we went, why don't we just do something for 2000 AD together? And that's where Brink came from. So yes, that's me.
So was it more of a okay? That's no, it's great. It's a good introduction. Thank you very much for that. But to get back to that then, because I do often because I read sort of like Wild's End, and I've read I've actually got like the Edwardians, so I know of those works and stuff. So I often do think of you guys sort of collaborating and stuff. So Brink, though, did it come out? Was obviously the collaboration was there first, and you came up with the idea together, or was it something you had and were like, "This is the idea I think we can work on"? Like, where did the idea for that come from?
The first thing we did, Edwardians, was an idea that I'd had, and it literally came to me one day, sort of fully formed. I went, "Oh, is that a good idea? Oh, I think that's a good idea." So I wrote it down, horrified to realise that I was writing an idea that involved vampires and zombies, which were then and are still ubiquitous. And I swore I'd never do anything with either of them because everybody was doing that. But I had this idea and went, "Oh no, that's too good to miss." So I pitched it to an editor I knew at Vertigo at the time, just sort of speculatively, and they emailed me back the same day and said, we want to do it. It was the fastest Vertigo had ever commissioned anything. And I went, oh, fantastic! I better think about how I actually write it then. And I knew Culbard's, or Flash as we call him, Culbard's work from 2000 AD, but I hadn't even met him. We'd never even spoken. But I liked his stuff, so I reached out to him. I said, "Would you like to?" I thought he would be perfect for Dead Guardians. So he said yes. We did it together. We realised we got on extremely well. And in fact, although Dead Guardians was my idea, obviously Ian coming to it brought with him all sorts of things that became part of the story in terms of the way it was visually told, which was terrific. So we then went, oh, what else can we do? And that's where we moved off and went to Wild's End and for Dark Ages at Dark Horse, etc., etc., etc. So by the time we arrived at Brink, we had evolved a working relationship whereby we sort of brainstormed ideas together. And I sort of brainstormed, the simple way of putting it is I sort of brainstormed the story side of it and Ian brainstormed the visual side of it. But it's far too simplistic a way of looking at it because actually those two things inform each other completely.
Interchange as well.
There's an interchange, yeah. There's all sorts of things, there's all sorts of weird things that happen in their conversations. I would say that almost every time we brainstorm an idea, what we start with, our starting place is never what we end up with, which is, I think, is an interesting thing. More than anything else I've ever brainstormed with anybody else, we transmute whatever it is we're doing from an initial premise into, right, I can't remember what we were talking about at the beginning, but now this is what we've got. And so we said, wait, 2000 AD, what should we do? We went, we'll do science fiction because we haven't really done science fiction anywhere else. And we had this basic notion, I think fairly early, that we wanted to do something sort of creepy and off-putting rather than explicit, and that I think the elevator pitch essentially was Outland meets True Detective. That was sort of our starting point, and then it evolved from there, and that's where it came from. And there were so many things about it. It's probably worth saying this up front. There were so many things about it that weren't 2000 AD that we were aware of as we were putting the story together. We knew that the length of the stories that we wanted to tell was 2, if not 3 times longer than most series run for in a slot in 2000 AD. We knew that it was not overtly fantastical in a way that a lot of 2000 AD stories were, that it was much more sort of mundane and almost realistic. That's not to say they don't do realistic stories, but it didn't fit into that mold of what you think of as a classic 2000 AD story. It was extremely, extremely conversational, and that we would deliberately roll out this kind of deadpan flat affect conversational deductive procedural with occasional bursts of violence and keep it very strange, and so on. And we went, well, we sort of ended up with something. We went, we really like this. We will show it to 2000 AD, having built it for them, but we don't expect them to commission it because there are so many things about it that makes it not a 2000 AD type of story. Thinking we would then probably have to take it somewhere else, probably to an American publisher. And to our astonishment, Tharg said, yes, do it. And so we did the first series, and we had no idea what the response would be, and the response was extraordinary and very, very positive indeed. And so we've been doing it ever since, and we've retained those key elements of the formula that we included in the first one, and that collaboration, that brainstorming that I talk about before we started it continues throughout. It is an ongoing process, even when we're up and running with a series of it. We are evolving things. Ian will ring me up and say, I've designed this. I think it looks like this now. And I go, well, if it looks like that, we should make it do this instead of this. You know, so there's all these things happening, and I think that's why I certainly enjoy doing it so much, because it's weird. It is. I probably plot Brink in more detail than any other thing I write, because we've got to make sure all the details work and there aren't going to be holes. So in much, sort of an outline for something like, I don't know, Sinister Dexter will be just a couple of paragraphs, because I will just sort of improvise when I'm scripting. With this, it's, before we get to a book, the entire series is written out episode by episode, explaining everything in excruciating detail. And even then, there is an evolution going on when we're working together.
Yeah, it's like one of the things early on. I think in one of the books, the back of the first book, there's like a script bit. And you'll see in there where it describes the crime scene. And I think in the script at that point, the body was on the floor. Yeah. And then I contacted you and I said, we should have the body floating because it's a space. Yeah. But also, it changes the nature of a crime scene because essentially, how do you deal with a situation like that? When is it locked down as a crime scene? Is it when you switch the gravity back on? And then everything, where it falls, where it is? It changes the nature of the crime scene completely. So that the world, in some way, has an effect on the situation taking place. It's one of those things. So it's not just set in space for no good reason, No. So,
when Ian suggested that, and we went, that's a really good, dramatic, unusual thing to do. We then we now need to work out how not how gravity works, but how gravity works in our story in terms of how the gravitational technologies work, which then led to us using it in other parts of the story to great effect. We go, okay, so there's a scene later in book one where she's being chased, and that works in a completely different way because we use the idea that you can turn gravity on and off to the way originally we planned to do it.
It's like Dan has a really good way of because I'll come up with a high concept, and a high concept's all right, but it's just an idea. Dan will nail it down, give it a name and address, and actually a function within the story that actually works. And I think the first time when I mentioned the ambigrav to you then went, right. And then that scene later on where they shoot the ambigrav, that's entirely because you just went, I'll work with that. And that riffing that we have, that you just it makes sure that we just have a bit more fun with it as we go along. There's nothing written in stone and set down. We sort of just go, what about if it was this and this and this? And it changes things a little bit. And if things work or don't work, they get chucked out and changed, and that's okay. But it's all towards getting the right thing down, at the end of it. Because I mean, like Wild's End, for example, we're talking about I all I contributed to that was Wild's End. It wasn't even called that. It was something that I can't remember what it was called. But the thing I had was like one sentence, which was War of the Worlds meets Wind in the Willows. To which Dan went, right, I've got like a 6-book series for that. Literally lit him up on fire, and he just came back with a whole bunch of stuff. And it was like, okay, so stuff sparks. Yeah. Because I always think that the high concept is if you imagine a kite flying around. And the low concept is you peg that kite to the ground so it doesn't just fly away. It's effectively doing that. And the low concept's the hard work. But it's like trying to, that's the hard thing, making things logically fit and everything in a story works for a reason and not just because it looks cool. Because high concept can look cool, but it can be meaningless really on its own. It really needs to work. And that's where it's brilliant working with Dan to be able to do that, because we spitball so much stuff. And Dan will come out with a high concept and then he's on his own basically.
You just sort of like the touch paper. You like the touch paper.
Yeah. But it is to go so that we don't worry about what we chuck in we call it omelette sessions, because it is literally chucking in all the eggs and chuck in as much as you can to see where something potentially could go and sort of entertain the idea of, there's a lot of what if discussions at that point at the beginning of just figuring out where it can go, because like Dan said, often all the ideas, they are what they are because of that process. They're not what they were when we first came up with the idea, if you get what I mean. Wild's End is kind of an exception because it's essentially a very easy elevator pitch to do, but the other ones are much harder to sort of pin down. I think we started with True Detective in Space. It was once the aesthetics started to come into it that it started to have that feel of that genre of 70s, like 2010, Outlands mentioned, 2010, the other ones. Moon is another one, because that actually draws on that genre of science fiction, which is the blue collar science fiction.
I call it like industrial science fiction.
That look and feel has a reality, a sort of lived in reality to it, and certainly a working class kind of vibe, blue collar vibe to it. And so those sorts of things really kind of became tagged on. But what we start with is pretty simple. I remember the concept of it was what was fundamentally what is the big picture. And I remember Dan saying, that's great, very large, big picture, but what if we went over here and we just looked at this person who happens to work here? And that became like, it's a completely different perspective. And it's always really good when you're bouncing off somebody who will get like, make you consider things in a slightly different way or whatever. Because when we don't agree, we always talked about this third idea thing. It's always interesting if we don't agree on something, because usually what that means is we both kill our darlings to find out what the third thing is, because the third thing is always the thing that works. That is the bit where it gets really exciting. If you're like, my idea is brilliant, if I'm like that and Dan says, no, my idea is brilliant, which we never do because we're grown-ups, but we if we are like that, like creatively, when that sort of, you do get those creative loggerheads happen, but that immediately means there's a third option and it's way better, and neither of us could have imagined it without going through that process. That's the other beautiful thing about it, is being able to come up with stuff in this way. We often talk about ways that people can come up with ideas and generate ideas from all sorts of things. You know, it's a really cool process. It's the fun part of the whole thing.
No, I mean, you say about the idea generation, because I mean, one of the things I would say, you know, I'm so glad you mentioned sort of Outland as well, because that was one of the things, that was one of my tweets when reading this. I was like, because I've recently watched Outland for another podcast we talked about. I'm reading Brink, and I'm like, oh, that I have that feeling, that industrial sort of science fiction where you're following that, the blue collar workers, and you do get the seniors and stuff. But one of the things I was fascinated by is, as I've gone through the 4 books, and I was going to ask, is like, there's world, because it's world building. Like, all this is world building, and so, you know, as you're adding on, okay, there's, you know, you've gone, here's book 1, now you've got book 2 and book 3, and you're adding to each of those. Like, are you keeping notes? Because it's
we are,
yes, it's pretty, so like you say, it's pretty tight. That there's things like, you know, there are like minor characters that come back in like book 3, and you're like, even I'm scrabbling back and going, hang on, like, you know, it fits in.
No, I and again, it's as I said at the beginning, I write a lot of things, and I do try and keep a careful record of the world building I do for any series or book or whatever else it is. But again, with Brink, there is a very high level of it, because the story itself depends upon those small things. It's you know, you could, with other things that are broader or more expansive, you can kind of wing it, and if you go, oh shit, I forgot I said that, never mind, we can get on with it. You know, you can work around it with this because it is so much about precise detail. It's her investigations of precise details that you need to make sure those things are consistent throughout. And I enjoy those moments where we can bring back something, or make a call back to something, or a character turns up or is at least referenced, and we're trying to do that without overdoing it and without making the world of Brink seem unnecessarily small and incestuous. There has to be a good, if we're going to bring a character back, for instance, there has to be a really good reason why they're there and why it works in the context of the story we're telling. And we got to that, obviously, in book 5, spoiler alert for you, but in book 5, we actually do that with the entire story loops and repositions itself. So we actually do something quite dramatic, which is apparently has worked really well. People really, really like it. But we basically retell something you already know, but from the point of view of someone else.
Yes.
And you can see the connective points between those things. And hopefully we're now at work on book 6, and there are things that will be revealed in that where you go, oh, I understand now why they spent so much time doing that thing just now that seemed like interesting, but you know. So again, we're constantly building. Well, when we did the first one, we knew what else we could do, how we could use the format to tell more stories. But only once they came back and said, oh, it's been very successful, can you do some more, did we start to get more ambitious and bold and build bigger, and also build more long term. So we've got several sort of books worth of story that we think it would be great if we get to tell that. And in fact, what would have been book, let me think, actually, it was originally going to be book 5, but we've got a great idea for a story. that we realised that if we told it, we couldn't tell several others. So that's what we slotted in book 5, and indeed book 6. Not that they're underpowered stories, but we went, we'll never get a chance to tell these stories if we tell that one first.
Okay.
So we've got these kind of goals in mind about what we want to achieve, and therefore we know what we're setting towards. So there will be these greater payoffs, I suppose. I hope so.
Do you guys?
I suppose if somebody was to say, you know, do we actually know what's going to happen? Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
But
That was a question. Sort of like, do you have an end point? Do you have an end goal in mind?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
But we also have contingencies.
Yes.
We build in. It's the best way to do
and one of those contingencies really is is as has happened so many times so far, if we suddenly get a good idea, we go, okay, we need to push back our end date in order to make room for this. And I do think we do have an idea of what's going on. We have an end goal. We have reveals. We have things where we go, when we finally get to the point where we go, right, that is it. We're now going to sort of do what we're going to do. But to me, and I could be completely wrong about this, but to me, the engagement of Brink is not so much where the story goes; it's how it gets there. To me, it is an experiential thing of being in that environment, of being privy to those conversations and the things that happen, to the atmosphere, to the tension, to the moments of truly uncanny. We try each time to deliver, or certainly from my point of view with the story, I try and deliver endings that you go, oh God, that was satisfying. The resolution of that, the reveal, the surprise, the twist, the verdict, whatever it is, was good. But to me, it is the movement of the investigation. And occasionally how it intertwines with her own life, what little we see of it, that is the really, really key part. So it's I say it? No, I'm going to say it anyway. It's the journey, not the destination.
I was about to say.
Yeah. No, it's
Dan will never say it.
I did.
I agree. I mean, I see that, and that is one of the things I love about it. I mean, it's sort of going from book 1 again. You know, spoilers when who hasn't read it, but I'm going to recommend it. But I'm not going to try and not spoil much. But like the book itself has sort of it keeps giving you surprises. Like the book's called Brink, and as you say, that sort of has multiple meanings because sort of they live. The first character, one of the first characters you meet is obviously Bridget Curtis, who becomes sort of like the main character, and her partner, who I'm just going to check his name, is called Brinkman.
Yeah,
and everyone goes, oh, and we call him Brink, and you're like, oh. And so, and he's this sort of like, rugged looking, sort of, almost square jawed.
He's clearly the lead.
Exactly, yeah. And so you sort of go, oh, he's your Sean Connery of Outlander. He's your Marshall.
Yeah.
And then obviously that sort of isn't the direction it goes in. So you're sort of like, oh, you're going to, this is, no spoilers because she's all over the covers of future things.
No, of course not. But what you're alluding to there is a demonstration of the fact that sort of nothing is out of bounds as far as we're concerned. No. Is that we want the readers to be pleasantly in a state of tension, that they don't know what's going to happen when you turn the page, because anything's up for grabs, and without sort of showing you how we make the sausages in too graphic detail, one of the things we thought early on was that we would probably switch. If we got to carry on doing the story, that we would regularly, not necessarily every book, but on a regular basis, we would switch the cast. We would move to a different character on a different habitat doing a different thing. They'd all be connected, so you begin to see this great pattern emerging of what was going on, but that we would change the cast, weirdly, like True Detective does. That wasn't a deliberate crib from that, but that was just the and I keep mentioning True Detective as a touchstone simply because it was that sense of unease that was we want to try. But anyway, that we would move the cast around. But by the end of the first book, really, and we found we had I suppose accidentally created a character in Curtis that we really liked. We really liked her sort of sullen silence and determination and all these kind of things. And obviously we wanted to build a good character, the way she looked, the way she behaved, the way she spoke. So it wasn't like we were surprised that we did a good job of building a character, but she was so solid. We went, no, we're staying with her. So she has then really continued through with the partial exception of book 5, which is a special case. But that she has actually become the core of it in a way that we weren't expecting, because we didn't. 2000 AD stories, generally speaking, are either milieu based. They're actually, this is a strip about this thing, this setting, and all sorts of things can happen in it. But almost always they are character driven. It's Joe Straight, it's Strontium Dog, whatever it is. That's the way you hang the strip on the character. And it's like, what adventures can we tell to that? And goodness only knows, I've written enough stories for 2080 to know that I've done that myself. These are the characters. It's this week's adventure. And the series continues until you run out of stories that you can think of to tell with that character. With this, with Brink, the idea was the setting and the people within it. That was what it was going to be about. It was going to be about the world, and that we would use different characters in order to explore that world. And to our real surprise, by the end of book 1, it was like, wait a minute, we've written a character-driven strip again. It's what it is.
Well, you say that, but like you say, you say, because and this is a cliche in and of itself, and they go, the location is a character. But granted, Curtis in itself goes from habitat to habitat, but the Brink, those habitats,
the Brink is
is most definitely a character in the story, and even the different environments and the art, Culbard. I know that the thing I notice is how your line work. I've always liked your line work is very good, but the colouring you use and it defines the areas, especially in book 2 when you go into the high-ranking offices of what's the name of the company, because I can't pronounce it.
Juno Corps.
Yeah. As when you get to those, like everything under, anything that's sort of like, if you think of it of upstairs, downstairs, right? Everything that's behind the scenes is that sort of like the colour. You've got purples and strong reds and blues and these darker colours. You mentioned that in the first book where she, where Curtis gets sucked into that thing and she's in that fight towards the end when it's all revealed. It's all dark. You go into sort of like the HR office, which I love, and even sort of the CEO's office and all these other things. Like, it's brightly coloured, it's well lit. There's yellows and there's oranges and there's all these. And so I like the fact that there's these clear distinctions in these spaces. And so,
but that is yes. It is, you're right. It's a cliche to say that the character in the setting is one of the important characters. The setting is one of the important characters in a story, and that is often true because it determines so much. But I think one of the things that we've deliberately done, because it is an interesting setting, and there's something terrifically depressing about the idea that the human race is going to end up in that, sort of claustrophobia of its own creation. Not to say that it's a political story at all, but the more we write it, it's like we're writing some kind of commentary by accident about what we're doing.
I wanted to touch on that. We will get to that.
But what I was going to say was that although we sort of come up with a case that she's dealing with each time and how they connect together, etc., etc., etc. One of the things we do try and do is to try and think of a really cool, distinguishing theme for each book, to say that's the book that was about that. So book 1 was the setup one that established the Brink, but book 2 is the one where we go, okay, it's a habitat again, but this time it's a habitat that's being built so it's empty. So the idea is like, how do you go from massive overcrowding to somewhere that is completely empty? Contrast. Book 3, you said upstairs, downstairs. I'm so pleased because that's exactly it. It was that whole idea of the serving class keeping behind.
I think we called it upstairs, downstairs in space.
We did, yeah. And that again gave it its distinguishing feature. So you get incredibly opulent big spaces where Ian actually was varying panel size to reflect those sorts of things.
Yes.
So we got that, and then book 4 is essentially going to more about the inside of the HSD, but the distinguishing feature there is the fact that it is Bridget's home, and that she's gone home again, and she has a personal connection to these things, which again shifts it in terms of its feeling. And book 5, if it's got a high concept of tool, is like, where should we set it this time? Can we set it inside one of the previous stories? And without giving anything away, book 6 again has got a very distinct. I wouldn't call them. I think of them as gimmicks, and I don't mean that in a disparaging sense. But each story has got a distinguishing gimmick which plays out and has a bearing on the way things work. So you might describe, for instance, in book 4, it's the fact that they get fined for swearing. So that the blacked out swear words that we've used previously, suddenly there is an in-world explanation for why that's happening, and it becomes part of the investigation and that sort of thing. So that we put these things in and go, oh, well, if it's there, let's use it. Let's make it part of the story. And I think that is That is right. I think that's the sort of the way to do it. And similarly, the story I'm talking about that we postponed now twice, that I think will now be book 7, I think has got the most fabulous gimmick in it. There's a way of telling the story. People will go, that's really interesting, the way it uses the technology in order to tell something that otherwise wouldn't get told.
No, I think that's, and I think you say how it's got to, because I think it's also you're saying about like the panel size and stuff, and you say it's. There's almost like an integration in the art and the way the storytelling. I think you can see this is a collaboration for this very purpose.
Yeah.
Like not just the coloring, but the panel sizing and all these elements of it helps the pacing as well.
Yeah,
like there are certain pages where
you've
you've done that kind of you've used, like you say, there'll be less panels because you want to increase the pace for across the page, and you'll bring it back down to multiple panels and there's a conversation. And you really are controlling the pace with the art, which I really sort of enjoy.
There was a couple of times where I was trying. The first time I think I was trying something in terms of, well, when I started with the color, I'd actually done the first 2 episodes or the first episode. And then I had a hernia operation. So I was in hospital. I think I did, for a repair or something. And I was off my face for a while because of the hospital drugs. But I remember sitting there while I was on hospital drugs thinking, I need to recolor that first book. It needs to look like Tokyo at night time or something. It needs to have this sort of the actual neon streets and stuff like that. And the other thing I remember thinking was the sets looked really like nobody actually. I remember there was do you remember the TV show called Rome from years ago in the BBC, and in the opening titles the camera sort of goes through the streets, but what you see is people have graffitied on the walls and stuff. That's how they work the titles through on that. But I was also thinking of primarily of there's a graffiti book that came out in the 1980s. There were 2 that came out, predominantly quite well-known ones at that period of time, and they showed the subway cars in New York absolutely caked in graffiti, like from floor to ceiling. And that was immediately, I thought, okay, neon lights in Tokyo or somewhere like that, where it's just neon everywhere, but on top of that, and that kind of color scheme, but on top of that, graffiti everywhere at the same time. So the minute I got home, I just went and redid that chapter. I don't know, I think it was just 1 actually, but I redid it, and in terms of the backgrounds, and then went, okay, this is what it's supposed to look like. It was like,
those color schemes also. Those color schemes also, I think, help to underpin the tonal quality of the story itself, because for instance, the bits you're talking about there's an awful lot of that lovely hot pink, which to me is a completely 1980s color, and that to me, that 1980s vibe in the color underpins the lo-fi analog 1970s science fiction technology that's going on. So it almost dates it. It's the future as imagined in the past. Through films that we're all terribly fond of, because that's the kind of technology we think science fiction should have.
That's one of the comments that we got from that episode. It's basically when, I've forgotten her name now, the head of thingy in book 2, when she shows up at the station.
Miriam.
Miriam. That's it.
So I can't remember the names of characters either.
It's like remembering all your kids' names, but it's not that bad. But no, but her character, she smelled a certain way. So I basically put hot pink in because of that. So it's in the gutters whenever she's in the panel, and it's funny because the intention was, I wanted you to be able to smell this cat, like the perfume that she uses is quite overbearing. So that when she's in a room, you definitely know she's in a room. It's thick in the air, the smell of this perfume. And I just thought, well, so I'll just make the borders all hot pink. And then lo and behold, somebody came back and said, oh, you can smell the character. Please.
But it is
that for someone.
Exactly. I think the strip is full of that. I think there's a lot of obvious mechanisms at work when you read Brink in terms of the plot and the story and the dialogue and the characters and the art and the way it all works and what the sets look like and all the obvious things that propel it along. But I think there are all sorts of these are things that we've done organically, not because we've decided that we're going to show off. But there are lots of things going on there. I think there are loads of invisible drivers in the art. For instance, there are loads of things that are actually forcing the story ahead in ways that you don't notice, except you notice what their effector is.
The vertical and horizontal panel thing in the class, in the upstairs downstairs one, was because what I wanted to do was when you read a comic and you have a wide panel, you're on it, your eye is on it for a lot longer than a vertical one. So normally in an action sequence, a vertical panel is for quick action and a wide panel is for a panel where your eye is going to stay on it and travel across the page. So it's like a staccato when you see a vertical one. But what I wanted to do was just show how cramped their living space was, but also the attention of the reader is afforded more on the person with luxury than it is with a person who's got nothing. And that's so that you're in the reader's position psychologically reading it, and you're affording the rich guy more than you are the other people in it. Because I wanted to be able to show that sort of class system in terms of, which sounds nuts, but
but that's a really good example of the sort of thing I'm talking about. Is the fact that we've deliberately done things
that rhyme and reason.
They're almost subliminal in order to almost determine the rate at which it gets read and understood. So there's all the things that Ian's doing with the panel shape and size and contrasting things like that. There's all the stuff that's, I mean, you know, in terms of words per square inch, there's a lot more dialogue in 5 pages of Brink than there are in most other 2000 AD 5-page stories. And that's because, again, it's conversational. And that's deliberately, if you like, because there's more to read, but it is conversational, it's slowing down the pace. So it's deliberately a slower read. I mean, not just because there's more of it, but just because of the rate at which you're reading it. So again, that's another one of the invisible drivers, like slowing you down and making it feel like time is passing and people are thinking a lot and they're doing these things. The other thing that I did, and I again did it instinctively very early on, was I realized that I wanted it to have this thing that we call the flat affect, which is the idea that most people that you encounter are professionals talking to other professionals about professional matters using professional terms. So coming up with it's not a slang or a jargon, but just coming up with the manner in which they speak. And I, like all comic book writers, use underline for emphasis when I'm writing a script in order to indicate that I want the letterer to put a word in bold. And in most scripts I write, there's probably a word in bold in almost every speech balloon somewhere, just to give you the emphasis of that sentence, because that's the way that comic book dialogue works. There are about, I would say, 75 to 80% less bold in Brink. I've deliberately used it as little as I possibly can, and only when it really needs emphasis, because it is either a shouted word or the emphasis is vital in order to communicate the sense of a sentence. So I've taken all the other ones out. So the scripts don't look like the scripts for anything else I write, because I want that almost to have that monotone deadpan thing where you have those conversations. Because like I said, professionals talking to each other are not melodramatically emphatic about things. It's already matter of fact. And that's what I wanted to get, that matter of factness, which again is another of these invisible drivers telling you what the speed of the story is, you know.
It also gives you a sense that you've arrived somewhere where a conversation's already been taking place.
Yeah.
So you get a sense of a lived-in world, because there's a thing in drama where you arrive late, get out early.
Yeah.
In terms of scene structure, but in this sense, a bit like the way that Star Wars looks.
Well, I think in Brink. In Brink, it's arrived far too late and never get out, isn't it? I think that's what. But then,
you're late.
You're
not leaving.
we really decided again before we did the first episode that we also would not, essentially, would not explain anything. That everything that needed, there would be no moments of outright exposition. That is to say, everything that was explained was legitimately explained in situ by characters who were explaining it to other people because they needed to know it. That we wouldn't have any of those, as you know, Bridget Curtis, blah 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 moments. Those sort of things. Nor would we obey the time-honored tradition of comics, the time-honored standby of comics, which is that the moment a character appears in a scene, one of the other characters must name them. Hello, Captain America. It's good to see you again. None of that sort of stuff. We wouldn't have any of those things. So we stripped that out, which is why we then ended up with the tagging system, whereby you had these sort of on-screen gloss as to what things are, and we did that so that we could keep the reader informed and not lose them completely, but we didn't have to have characters talking artificially in ways that would make people go, oh, real people don't talk like that. So again, trying to make them sound like real people because they had real conversations, but they didn't mention their name every 5 minutes and that kind of stuff. But then once we got the tagging system in it, we went, wait a minute, we can use that for other things. We can do things with that explains more than just the necessary bits of exposition, but actually there are sort of clues hidden in them sometimes. There's sometimes a piece of information will be given you about a character or a place, and you go, wait a minute, if that's the case, and and it's not something, it's something the characters themselves are unaware of. It's just happening there in the sort of in the kind of situation of what the information that's being expressed. So like I said, loads of invisible things happening that hopefully you absorb as you go.
Oh, you do. And this is the thing I say, I want to go back to those taggings in a minute, but technically, and here's the thing, technically it's fantastic, and I think, but like you say, when it's technically that good, you don't notice it because you are just being.
That's the hope,
and that's it. It does work because it does control the pace, and you do sort of have that thing of sort of like it's that it is a conversation, it's an investigation, as you said. It's done by professionals, and so. This isn't a shooty, punchy kind of comic. This isn't the pew pew kind of at every page. No, but it shouldn't be, because if it was, then there'd be terrible.
Well, if it was, it would be Judge Dredd, and that would be fine, because that's what I mean. That's doing a massive disservice to the high quality stories of Judge Dredd.
No,
Judge Dredd is a heroic action story about a cop.
Yeah, but
why do another one of these? This is not going to be that. That's why when the violence happens.
It's more exactly. It's more.
It happens for about half a page every. But it's so unpleasant, and hopefully again realistic. That people things happen in kind of unpredictably horrible ways, and you go, "Oh, that's not dramatic. That's not a dynamic moment. That's just nasty."
No, but I think that's the point. So I say the point about saying it not being. Because you're right, I am a massive fan of Judge Dredd, and I like a bit of shooty, punchy. But of course, when you are when you're trying to sort of emulate that 70s aesthetic of industrial science fiction, like if you then insert all that stuff into it, it feels inauthentic. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's the thing of it. Like this feels authentically of that era and that thing. Because I want to talk about the tags. You know, when you say you hear noisy, you say you smell a character. I hear a noise when I hear.
Excellent.
Do you know, like, it's from Alien, it's from Outland. You know when they have the screens and there's the sort of when the text comes up. And you get the sort of like that clicking, sort of computerized clicking noise.
Yeah.
That's what I hear when I'm reading those, because that's how I imagine them. Yeah. So I love them. I think they were, especially when you get them for the habitats, and it is like,
and
I'm like, the habitat so and so, exactly, built in this year, and I'm like, I love that. It's great.
You'll be pleased to know that I actually, for reasons of aesthetics and whatever, I actually type on a old school clicky tick keyboard because I enjoy the tactile feel of a clicky keyboard rather than
of those.
Yeah, and so actually when I'm typing those sentences, it's actually going.
Fantastic!
That is incredibly satisfying to know.
That's a brilliant. Simon Boland does a brilliant job of it, because those scripts. When they come in, that's a tight amount of work that he does on those books.
Very good.
Really, the space he has to work with and stuff. But I think it's also one of the brilliant ways is the aesthetic of it that he put to that immediately, right from the get-go, with that tag with the like line with the dot at the end of it. But I also really like the way that he gets our scripts, and he gets Dan's script, but in it he's got the Dan writes the whole thing, but he writes it with all the swearing in. Poor Simon's got to block them out.
Yeah. Again, I write them in so that the sentences make sense properly.
Yeah.
Rather than just like putting in Grawlix and stuff like that. Yeah. So there's a little. I just repeat it every script now, but there's an instruction at the beginning of each script which is that we're going to block out the swear words. And I say so when I underline a word, I mean make it bold for emphasis. When I put a word in bold in the script, I mean black it out.
Yeah.
And then I just write all this filthy dialogue.
Yeah.
Absolutely, some of it.
Has to
There are some
redact all of it.
moments, and then just put in bold all the words that he can't actually write in there, and then
we have a triple check system before the book goes
Yes.
out. Basically, there's the editor gets it, I get it, Dan gets it.
we
We're
read
always
it.
scanning the boxes to see.
And
if
it's
any
almost
swearing-
always that we've almost missed a swear, and we'll get an email from Tharg saying, "I think this episode's good to go out this afternoon, but I think we left a fuck on page 3."
Basically, yeah.
Well, page 3 is always the best place to have a fuck.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing I wanted to talk about is you mentioned obviously about True Detective and it being a procedural, and we'll touch on the sort of procedural element of being a conversation on being professionals. But I want to sort of touch on this weird. You said about this unease, and that we were touching on before we started, sort of this the weird fiction element, and the unease of this is. We know, and it's sort of again, it's not an exposition because it comes up in conversation, and it's sort of this idea that they're on a ticking clock. Like these habits, I mean, it's a whole part of book 1 really. That there's a ticking clock. Like these habitats are not sustainable beyond a certain point, but no one's really trying to do anything because it's either too expensive to invest in propulsion and so on and so forth. So you've already got this unease of this thing being unsustainable, and like you're in space, this manufactured thing. You would like there's like the hull between you and a vacuum, and it's not sustainable. So there's that unease, and then you are throwing in these cults or these sects, and this idea of this sort of demon god living in the sun, or about the sun, which is and so which is very Lovecraftian in this idea of these elder gods or whatever. But one of the things I like to throw this in from a weird fiction point of view is you have all these sects and this sort of thing, these cults, and they often have some sort of like creation theory. They obviously they you guys are building it around a destruction.
Yeah.
Like this is an end game, an end sort of like an ultimate apocalypse kind of cult, and so there's this constant doom sense in everything, and sort of you keep weaving it into, and then you move away from it. So I love the fact you'll have like Brink witnesses it in the first sort of book, and then you get some of the set, and then Bridget Curtis will see something I think in the second book, and but it's never like. It's never explicit, as you said. It's constantly sort of going, this could just be the nudge, which is the drugs.
Well, exactly. That's
it could be this, or it could be that. It could just be the fact that they were so crowded and so forced into his environment. This thing has just become like a way for people to process this fear and this doom. Yeah. And so I love the fact that it's never pinned down, like you said. It's never, but it's there. Yeah. It's tangible throughout all of it. Everyone you meet is touched by this.
Exactly. We've tried. One of the things we've tried to do with that actually is that wherever, for every bit of weirdness you get, particularly if it's an ostensibly explicit piece of weirdness where you actually see something properly weird, we always build into it a sort of ejector seat which says, "Oh, but was it real, really, or was it simply just like altered consciousness, or was there another explanation for it?" And for every weird concept introduced, there will be at least one counter theory which explains it really neatly. I found when you get to book 5, you'll find there are a couple of moments there where some of the things that you would have considered creepy for 5 books, somebody just goes, "Oh no, that's just that," and you go, "Oh God, is it really?" They're like a really prosaic everyday thing. So it comes down to the idea they're cops hunting people who are essentially out of their minds because of the horrible conditions they live in and the drugs they take, who happen to be killing people. And they have almost fabricated this illusory weirdness that is their escape mechanism for the shit that they live in. Or is it? That's the whole this thing. Or is it? It could have been called "Or is it?" That whole idea. So like, what is the disturbing thing? And I think there is unmistakably that Lovecraftian feel to it, I think, in places. And in fact, I suppose we easily could have decided to make it a mythos story and use the mythos. But again, to come back to True Detective as that touchstone point, one of the other things I like about True Detective is it's kind of second-hand or third-hand Lovecraft. It's definitely Lovecraft, but it derives as much from Lovecraft's circle of imagination, the sort of collective mythos rather than the original and that kind of stuff. So, and again, it's full of those moments where you go, was that really weird, or was that just because I'm now used to the idea that it's going to be weird, I'm expecting it to be weird? And so we wanted to. I've always been quite fascinated. I think Ian has too, about just how ridiculously successful Lovecraft's mythos has become. How it's permeated weird fiction. There are many other great mythos and strangenesses and things out there, but none of them have got the penetrative power of the Cthulhu mythos. And it's like, well, why? And it's not just because it's particularly well done, and it's not because it's got that particular. It's all. I think one of the reasons that it has been so successful, and it has been, everybody now wants to do something that touches on the mythos. It's all. There was a point in the 80s and early 90s where it's like it's the thing to do. Oh, it's going to turn out to be related to the Cthulhu mythos, of course. And I think that is because there has always been a sense, even with Lovecraft himself and the other people who wrote that stuff in the early days, is it real? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. There was always a sense that it's like, is he making this stuff up, or is he getting it from somewhere? Because it had a sense of resonance. The idea that people in the 1980s could allegedly publish the Necronomicon, and people go, oh, is it the real Necronomicon? There was always that sense of, and it's very Borges, actually. The idea is that was it fiction that's becoming real, or was it some reality that is permeating fiction? And I like that, and I tall order to try and emulate that. But I thought, rather than just borrowing it and joining that, is there a way we can fabricate that same sense of uncertainty as to whether the strangeness was just strange because that's how we saw it, or was genuinely strange and impinging upon our reality, without simply going to Lovecraft's toolbox and saying, all right, we're nicking everything here and we're just going to use it ourselves. So I think that was one of the things we deliberately set out to do, was to sort of do a mythos story that wasn't that mythos, but was trying to use its mechanisms to freak you out.
And it works in that sense, because I think you're right. The term Lovecraftian gets bandied around for, and it's so much stuff,
Yes.
And some of it's so much on the fringes that actually, like you say, because there is a wider genre of weird fiction, and we talked about a couple of others. We talked obviously about, and especially touching on True Detective, which was obviously was partially inspired by the works of Thomas Ligotti. But there's loads of these others that sort of have contributed to weird fiction. But one of the things that I like about the weirdness in this, or the weird fiction element, is that thing of, like, you've got this out, but it's the fact that some people do believe it.
Yes.
And how much of it does it start to infringe or in sort of infuse with our reality? If enough people believe it, it starts to become real.
Yeah. Isn't that the modern day?
Exactly.
Well, yeah.
Fake news, sort of, yeah.
But that's it. I certainly thought early on that much as I love Lovecraftian fiction, it is now such a shortcut to making people think this is a weird story that it's now lazy to do that. Yes. The first few times people did it, you went, "Oh, that's so cool," that it's kind of seeped across into another thing. But it's now like it's just a shorthand. It's like, how do I make this story feel real? Oh, I'll mention Nyarlathotep, and everybody will go, oh, you know what I mean? And it's like, and sometimes it's done to great effect. And I'm thinking, mate, can you do the same thing without it being referential? Can you do the same thing can you create that same mood without any exterior sense that it's drawing from something else and therefore has become sort of trans-textual or intertextual? And I think that's one of the things that we wanted to do. And also the idea that particularly Curtis, whether Curtis believes it's real or not, and there is that becomes increasingly doubtful, because almost everybody's going, this stuff isn't real, and yet is that she's realized one of the only ways to deal with it is to treat it as if it is real, because the people she's dealing with believe it's real. But the more you do that, the more you are creeping to the point where it's like you're going to start to convince yourself of this as well.
Well, this is the thing. One of the things I like about, and the fact that you've stuck with Curtis, and I think this has been the benefit of sticking with the character, is the phrase. I'll say I'm halfway through book 4, and the thing I'm thinking about, the phrase that came to me is, if you look into the void for too long, the void looks back.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm reading 4 and going, that's at the point that she's at now, where she's constantly said, no, like you say, no, it's not real. I know, it's not. There is no demon god living in the sun. There's not this. There's not that. It's all nonsense. They're all fueled by nudge and claustrophobia and all this other stuff. But then, like, you notice that sometimes her answers, like in the towards the end of the third book, like she's asked this directly, and you have a panel of silence, which is rare. And then the next one she says no. So that's that sort of hesitation you're like, oh, wait a minute, she's not entirely sure herself anymore. Like, it's starting to seep in. And this idea of sort of as you said, the metatextualness of it, like this idea again, sort of the thing that I was just checking. I've got it is Robert W. Chambers, The King in Yellow. Like not the Lovecraftian version, not the creature that came later, but the idea of this play and these sets of stories that are complete sort of only linked by this version, this play that never gets described, but can drive you mad. But this thing that just exists in this world that everybody else is aware of, and sort of, you almost want to dare yourself to read it. Oh yeah, but I know that Jeffries has read The King in Yellow, and he went mad after Act 2. And it's the same with this, where you're going like, I don't want to know about it, but I've sort of got to.
Well, that goes over into Japanese horror as well, the ring cycle.
Yes.
Blood, and that sort of carries over into popular culture as a consequence, without anybody probably realizing that Chambers had written that all that time ago. That's forgot what the name of that horror is, when it's sort of transmitted by a thing.
Yeah, or mimetic, I think is the word. Because that's even something that we're really doing in book 4, isn't it? Really, because the idea there that there is something that you shouldn't watch. If you watch it, then it's too late, and you're going to turn psychopathic. And I think I think there's some really great. Chambers is the great example of that. But there was also, and I can't remember when it was. I'm racking my brains, but wasn't there that it was the, I'm going to say 1860s, 1870s. There was a popular song that allegedly, if you heard it, you committed suicide, and there were the
Tuesday. It's a Hungarian or
it's the yes, that's what it is. Yeah.
It was something like Rainy Tuesday. Or something.
Yeah.
That's right.
These ideas that there are inherently dangerous things that you can experience, and that's it. It's
well, to be fair, I've listened to quite a bit of folk music. There's a lot of songs that you listen to.
But no, you joke. There is that. There is. My parents actually were involved in the folk revival in the 60s, and I remember some of the origins of some of the traditional songs have got those things about it. There was a song which was all these songs being handed down so they could be preserved, but there was one song that was handed down in that kind of traditional fashion which nobody wanted to perform because it was considered blasphemous, but everybody learnt it so the song wouldn't be forgotten. But nevertheless, it wasn't as if you went to a club and they performed, it was like, no, you shouldn't have done that. That's a bad idea. And so even that, it's not like, oh, we'll die, but it was considered inappropriate. They wanted to make sure the song wasn't lost, but even so, and I love that idea that sort of both mimetic and hermetic information that is too dangerous to lose, but too dangerous to hear.
Well, again, that comes up to the language. That there's this secret language that actually makes people have a physical reaction and stuff, isn't it? As well, you've got that in there, in the books and stuff. And so, I love that, this idea of tradition. But it's, and we'll wrap up on this bit because there is one final point I want to get to. But they say that it's tradition. I've literally just written an essay about this, but this idea of like folklore and tradition gets transmitted and then evolved to the environment. So, it moved from the sort of the rural and into the cities during the Industrial Revolution, and has again mutated during the Internet age. And then you transmit that into these sort of sealed environments in space, and again they change. You're no longer looking at sort of like witch doctors or sort of wise women or cunning folk or whatever. You're now looking at these sort of like sect leaders in this other thing, and sort of like space now takes, and this idea of being in space takes a much more of an influence on it. So
absolutely, and it lurks there intrinsically. It's mentioned several times as the idea that they've taken with them anything they can take. Essentially, they've left Earth with whatever they can carry. Yeah, and the important things they brought with them are their ideas and their memories, their traditions, most of which they don't remember precisely. because that's the way Hamby Nam stories work. But the other thing they brought in is the very raw materials they need to live in, including the air, because the air is the one vital thing that they absolutely need. And the idea that there are things stored, the air is a sort of almost like it contains recordings of all the things that have ever been said in it, and that is a thing that we return to on a number of different occasions, which is actually an old idea going back to I think the 17th century. The idea that the air is a sort of the ultimate record of speech and idea. And I love that. I thought if your world dies, but you take some air from it, so you can go somewhere else and live in that pocket of air, which is essentially what they're doing. Is that you have taken that essence with you? It goes back to sort of pre-Newtonian alchemists' ideas, and I love that idea that those sort of weirdly those things which was so fashionable, and then everybody went, no, that's just completely ridiculous. We've got science now. We don't need that. And then you get to this point, you're going, well, maybe, maybe. And we're seeing that more and more in the present day, where ideas that seemed preposterous because they were so old-fashioned are now being revived, not because we're going, oh, that was true after all, but we're going, actually, that was just a very odd old way of explaining something that we've now worked out. But actually, you can see they were onto the right thing. They just said it in a way that made it sound ridiculous. And I love
how they articulate it. Oh, there's definitely sort of things in different sorts of magic and folklore and all that sort of thing. Yeah. Final point that you sort of said about how predictive this series has been. We are, we're now sort of got the sort of the stop oil and the sort of the protests that are going on, and there's people predicting that we're 2 degrees away from complete sort of global catastrophe. And we know this idea of sort of losing the Earth is in some people's minds, not a science fiction. It's a very sort of real science fact, and we have these massive organisations, that go sort of like, we're doing our best to bring down our carbon footprint as they all whack up the sort of production line and and I like the fact that we lose the Earth, and in such a human way, we sort of don't learn anything.
No,
because we then go into space, and the 1%ers still rule everything, and there's still this thing of like driving profit. There's still sort of all this talk of entertainment and all these other bits and pieces, but there's still this thing of going like, but this isn't going to last either. Like, this is our last gasp, and you're still not learning the lesson. Like,
yes, this is Brink is end stage capitalism in remission. Briefly, do you know what I mean? It's like we didn't think we'd get this extra few months, but we have. And the thing is, clearly, when we set up Brink and we started it, which is what now 7 years ago, we started. We were drawing on things that were topical and indeed predictive at the time. Things that we thought, oh, that's going to make this feel quite realistic if we extrapolate, as all science fiction always does, on things that are happening right now, and extrapolate a condition to ultimate or at least satirical levels in order to make a point. But I found it weird that even in the comparatively short space time we've been doing Brink, some of the things that we've included, because they seemed to fit and were interesting, now make it look like we're writing properly complicated satire, where we've got an agenda that we're trying to put across. And I'm going, it wasn't that at all. It's just that we took the same raw ingredients that were around us at the time, and actually we've been experimenting with them in real time whilst the world's been doing everything it's done. And actually, it's weird that we've reached the same conclusion. So you mentioned there the 1%, the idea that the corporations are still ruling everything, that they haven't learned, that they weren't prepared to stop then and they're not prepared to stop now, that all that matters is the idea that they've got a literally captive audience, that we've got essentially and we play it in a slightly different way, obviously, but the antagonistic nature of unions and trade union movements and labour movements as being the bad guys who are hurting these lovely corporations. The horrible men downstairs are hurting the horrible corporations. But the idea that one of the even the unions that we portray in a lot of detail, we're trying to be very even-handed. They are very tough. But the idea is that none of this would exist without them having built it in the first place. So survival entirely depends on them having done the very dangerous work to build the Brink in the first place for them to be there. No wonder they're proud and defensive of that and their traditions and their weirdnesses and all the things that drove them mad whilst they were doing it. So again, to make that situation, so it is in some respects very clear cut that you've got, rich people at the top and it's not very good and blah, blah, blah. But also that it's enormously complicated. That there are, these things can't be unpicked in a very, very simple way. So I'd love to say that we sat down and we built this agenda 7 whatever years ago, and going, right, through this as a work of fiction, we will explore all the things that we want to explore. And it's not. I think in many respects it's actually more interesting to realise that if we started playing with the same ingredients and thinking, this is interesting, what would happen if, that's, and then you see those things sort of happening, like I said, in real time, playing out at the same moment. And I think that's it does make me worried about when we brainstorm the next book and go, well, what should we put in this time? And I go, should we put that in case it comes true? I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's like book 7. I wouldn't want that to happen.
No.
I'm now both very excited and concerned about what's coming in sort of like 6 and 7.
Yeah.
So,
some of the stuff, though, it was weird because there was some of the stuff, book 5 was written sort of during COVID, really.
Yeah.
And over that period. And it was... there was stuff that you'd written, and then 3 weeks later it actually happened.
Yeah, several times.
So although it comes out later, there was a moment which was like, holy crap, I didn't think that was going to happen.
Yeah,
you've just written about that 4 weeks ago.
Yeah,
and it did happen. So it's like, it is really writing. It's writing more in tandem than in reaction, really, to everything that's happening.
Yeah. And sometimes I do think that maybe it doesn't necessarily get noticed. Not that it needs to get noticed, but it doesn't get noticed by the lovely loyal readers of 2000 AD, because 2000 AD, from its birth in 1977, has always been iconoclastic and satirical. I mean, the greatest strips, Judge Dredd being a really good example of that, is high satire at its most brilliant. And Judge Dredd itself has predicted, like The Simpsons, has predicted so many things just because it's gone, what's the most ridiculous thing we could do now? Oh, look, that'll happen in 10 years' time. And it genuinely has. And you see that happening all the time. So actually, 2000 AD readers, in my opinion, have got an incredibly high political awareness, because they're reading a thing which relies on them understanding the references that are being made and the kind of nudges that are being made. But also they have an incredibly high satire threshold. Yeah. Because they're used to it. They're going, I'm completely accepting this world, even though I know it's a parody of blah. Yeah. Because they're used to that. And I think it's quite interesting that although there are certainly satirical elements in Brink, and therefore it seems to conform to the 2000 AD mode of going, we're going to satirize the society today in this story. There is that going on. I'm not saying it isn't, but what is probably being read as high satire is not that at all. It's like, oh my god, the world's done that too. Do you know what I mean? It's much more a case of we're simply extrapolating from a position that we built, and weirdly ending up in places that look like satire or commentary, because of the way the world's going. And I think I don't know whether that's good or bad. I certainly think it's interesting. But as I say, I think a lot of readers are going, oh, it's like Judge Dredd, isn't it? It's kind of exaggerating the world for dramatic effect or comic effect. And I'm going, well, no, not really, actually. No, not really.
It is literally to the point where everything globally is happening so fast that it's outrunning us, and it's it is worrying because of where Brink ends up. But it's like, I think it is one of those things where you don't really we are really living in the time right now. So it's not, and all writing is reflective of the era that it's written in, isn't it? To some degree, it's always going to be subconsciously anyway. So.
Well, I think they've always said about science fiction is never about the future. Science fiction is about the right now. And I think it's really interesting that we're now writing science fiction that feels like the future because it's about the apocalypse. And you're going, oh, do you know what? We're still writing about that
right now.
Well, I think that's one of the things. I mean, it's funny you say that because I'm also doing like a watch through of the Twilight Zone, the original Rod Serling thing, and we're I'm working through with one of my podcast partners, and we're into season 3, and
one of my favorite shows of those.
It's amazing, and I love so much of it, and it's fascinating. Because of that point, if you're watching it from the sort of like that thing in this is early 60s, sort of 61, 62, and there is so much there that you do go, you're sort of going like, wow, like Serling, and obviously it had, all these other authors and these contributors and stuff that you go, and I'm watching episodes and going like, like that clearly that became like 10 years later. Like I'm saying, well, that became a theme in a whole number of films, like later on, or like, oh, that sort of came up again and again. And so you're right. There's when it's written, these things are, when these science fiction things are written well of the time, you can see that it's sometimes not so much life imitating art. It's often sort of like, like art is predicting life. Like you can almost sort of see those conclusions coming.
I think there's also an element of the fact that we repeat the same mistakes. I think when you look at the Great Dictator, is that the Charlie Chaplin? And it was his first bit of dialogue that he does, and it's one where he addresses the crowd and he talks about very liberal socialist points that he brings up within that speech. He wants everybody to get together and work together, and it's completely contradictory to the character he's playing. And yet that's written roughly how long after Lovecraft died? So that's the thing. When people talk about Lovecraft, they always say, oh, he's a man of his time. And I'm sort of thinking, no, he wasn't. He was ridiculous himself. But people did think just as liberally as they do today. Then they didn't think any differently. People do know right from wrong. Throughout history, you can go right the way back. But the point is that we seem to have this tipping balance where it just sort of shifts over into often greed and things like that.
Well, and I think if science fiction is actually people are writing about the now or the near present by extrapolating the things around them, writing about their own environments for satirical or predictive effects. One of the reasons that science fiction seems to come true so often, particularly when it like I said, it's quite vicious, like Dredd is, or like The Simpsons is, or maybe like we are occasionally. One of the reasons that it seems so predictive is that I honestly think the people writing it are going, I'm going to put in this thing that is pure satire because it's extrapolating on something now, because it's the most ridiculously stupid version of this trend that I can see possibly happening. And I am placing it in this as a warning for you not to do it. And then it appears to be predictive is because no one listens to the warning. They ignore the warning and you end up with the same sort of thing. Now, I think that's great. You think about science fiction being predictive, like Arthur C. Clarke essentially inventing all these things before they actually happen. You go, well, that's brilliant. But I think thematically and socially, science fiction is doing that all the time. And the reason, unfortunately, it seems to be predictive rather than informative is because we don't listen to the warnings.
No. Well, we just seem to think it's funny because one of the things that's noticeably absent, I would say, from the Brink universe is robots.
Yes.
And that sort of technology. So I was interested by that because often that's sort of like a science fiction trope and they exist over the place. But there's very little automation. This goes back to this analog world that you want to create. But one of the things, obviously, we've had, from the moment we sort of had this idea that the word robot, obviously, when it was created, that sort of, I can't remember the name of the play, but it builds through this idea of robotics and then understanding. And then obviously as computers got more faster and they could do more, all of a sudden, like these stories start to come through of like, oh my God, they're our destruction. And all of a sudden, like, then you get like Skynet and all these things. And we go, oh yeah, no, like that's awful. But it's cool as well because and then sort of like all of a sudden you're seeing on like social media or on websites, you go, look what robots can do now, and you've got them running like a parkour course and jumping.
Oh yeah.
And
well, did you know that today it was announced that I don't know which city it is, but a city in America has authorized the use of robots that can apply lethal force to police its streets.
Oh, God.
That has actually happened. So we've now got RoboCop.
We've got the mech judges are on the streets.
Absolutely.
Well, I read recently an AI. I don't know if you've seen the one that's like a torso with a head and stuff. I forget the name of it, but it's an AI in a sort of a face and stuff. It's got that face. Actually gave evidence. Yes, that's the one. Yeah.
Okay, it was in a movie. White Knight or White something. And a friend of mine directed that one, but it was called Sophia, I think, or
something like that. Yeah. Well, because of the advancements in the software and the AI that came with it, it gave evidence, and I refer to it as in it because I'm still confused about gendering.
I know which one you took. That's not the one I was thinking of. Totally different one.
Yeah, about gendering a robot.
Robot.
One gave evidence in Congress.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm now. Oh. And I'm sort of like, okay, we're now in a weird world.
It went to the parliamentary committee over here to discuss digital rights or something. I can't remember what it was. Oh, AI art, I think, as well.
Yeah.
AI rights. Yeah, that was here in in
Was it House of Lords? Was it then? Or?
yeah, what do you call it when they have
I
those
think it happened
meetings?
at Congress as well. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
they
this
actually sat down and gave their responses to stuff. But
Yeah.
it was interesting watching the people interviewing them, because at first there was that nervousness of the fact that feeling like you're, talking to an animatronic thing. But then as the articulate answers came back, they're suddenly talking to it rather
Conversing.
than the person operating
Yeah.
it. It was brilliant. And the British one was brilliant one because before the start of it, it was going slightly wrong, and he had to switch it off and switch it back on again. I know.
Fantastic.
50 years from now, I'll be damned for saying that. But
yes,
is
rovers
why-
are listening.
This is why. Yeah, this is why.
You laugh.
Whenever Alexa does anything for me, I say thank you because it's going to remember.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Anyway, that was just so yeah. So we've gone through everything, and this has been a fantastic conversation. And I want to say thank you very much for both of you coming on because it's been and Brink is a wonderful series of books.
Thank you.
I'm thoroughly enjoying it, and where it's going to go, I don't know.
We do.
Yeah,
We do.
Yeah,
I'd like to take this opportunity to apologise in advance for the ending of book 5 and the ending of book 6 and most of book 7.
Yeah, it's one of those where sort of like I'm excited and looking forward to it with sort of an anticipation and anxiety.
Anxiety, yes.
It's but yeah, it stands up as, and I often hear this because I would say I'm a latecomer to Brink because of I get the 2000 AD Ultimate Collection.
They're really nice, actually.
They're wonderful editions.
Really well printed.
Yeah. Because of the fact it's sort of I jump on and off 2000 AD often, and because I prefer reading sort of collected editions, and so it's not easily penetrable. You get to have that wider world, but do not be scared by it. Go back, get the editions. You can obviously get the individual books, or you can get these sort of collected editions from the Ultimate Collection. But it's a wonderful, and it's standing up as to me. And I'm trying not to sort of sound like I'm blowing smoke or sort of like just praising for the sake of it, but it stands up as one
praise
of those,
away.
Yeah, but it will stand up as one of those sort of like collections of works within the 2000 AD legacy that people will go, that works as not just individual books, but as an overarching thing. This is what 2000 AD does best, is these sort of types of stories where it's not what you expect, it takes you by surprise, it does different things, it looks fantastic, and technically it's wonderful. I mean, one of the things I would say is, just to sort of as a final point, is I read a lot. There's European science fiction. I'm often sort of saddened that we don't get a lot of it translated into English.
Yeah.
This still has a feel of that European science fiction as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which I greatly appreciate as well. So it has that appeal as well. So
did I talk to you about I think I spoke to you about it before, because I grew up on Valerian and Laureline. And
yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah,
all those European books. Yeah, big influence. But yeah, rather than the US side of things, really, it's much more the European side of things.
This has definitely got that. This is way more sort of that European flair than the US books. And so this is why I'm glad that it was picked up by 2000 AD rather than you having to go off to sort of like a Vertigo or Dark Horse, because I think that would have maybe sort of shifted the I don't know.
Yeah, but I think it would have truncated it, if nothing else, because we'd have been forced to get it into a smaller space.
Yeah,
and that would have lost one of the intrinsic qualities of what it was. That it has that sort of meandering feel because it finds its own space to do that in, I suppose.
Yeah,
what's
and it
amazing is we get to tell it in the space that we get to tell it as well, because it's most series of 2000 AD, they're 12 parts long, whereas we get to run for quite a substantial amount of time. I think the last one was 24 parts, so we get a good run at it, and so it's really great to be able to have that space and that time to be able to do it, because it's such a different beast to everything else, I think.
Yeah.
It does. It breathes, and in breathing in that way, it's sort of you've created a different world. Or well, actually, no, let's say you've screwed up a world and built something else.
No, it was already screwed up when we got.
That's pretty true,
It wasn't us. This was how we found it.
Yeah.
But anyway, yes. Oh well, there will be if you hold on, guys, there'll be more information about Brink and where you can find it, and there'll be links down below in all the notes. But Ian and Dan, thank you so much for this conversation. This has been great fun. I've really enjoyed it. And I will be recommending obviously Brink to as many people as possible. And not just, I would say, that the written word. There's an audio book version as well.
There is.
Or an audio drama version that's on Audible and several other places. So if you can't read it, check it out and listen to it. I haven't listened to it yet, but I will try that. But anyway, where can people find you, Dan? Where can people find you? So Dan, where can people find you and other things that you are doing?
Well, they can find me in all sorts of places. I'm quite easy relatively easy to track down on things like Facebook. Weirdly, which is like an old drug habit that I can't quit. I am on Twitter, but I don't use it on account of the trash fire that it's turned into. So I'm reachable. I think I think you can, even if you just direct message me on things like Facebook, you can find me, even if you're not a friend of mine. You can find me appearing in all sorts of things. 2080 on a very regular basis. Obviously, Brink is a thing that I love doing. I'm also doing The Out. And Sinister Dexter and something else that completely escapes me. Oh, Farrell and Foe. There's lots of things going on in 2080, and obviously Lawless in the magazine. And I'm writing stuff for Marvel and DC at the moment. I'm just in fact, yesterday they launched the Warhammer game Dark Tide, the computer game that I've been working on for the last 2 years. And I obviously write for the Warhammer universe on a regular basis. And I've spent the last 2 years writing the biggest and most ridiculous novel I'm ever going to write for them, which will be coming out in February. So there's a huge amount of places that even if you can't see me directly, you can certainly see the horrors of my handiwork.
Excellent, so much to check out there. Thank you. And Culbard, what about yourself? Where can people find you and what you're up to?
Hidden away in the dark in a cave somewhere, shivering. No, I've got a Twitter for what that's worth. I don't know what that means anymore and how long it'll be there. The other one is I don't have the urge to Exodus to Mastodon and all those other things because it was just about managed Twitter. So I can't.
Exodus to Mastodon sounds like a Star Trek episode.
I was like, wow, that's got a beat to it. That has. But the other one was I've got an Instagram account, INJ Culbard Instagram, I guess. I didn't know how you do the handles on those ones.
Yeah.
And then I have a Facebook, but it's a shut one. So I'm barely contactable. I don't even have a website, and nobody knows who I am anyway. I keep incognito. No, yeah. I don't have. They do say make sure you got an artist website, and you think I've never had one. No. But I do have Instagrams, kind of, and Instagram and the other one. I have started to post artwork on there, which I'm always kind of find weird to do, but I do try to do it. But yeah, so I'm around. And
you have got obviously Salamadre has come out.
Yeah, that's out now, and from Burger Books, and that's me basically.
Yeah, no, that's cool. We'll say there'll be links to all these sorts of things down below. But once again, thank you very much. It's been a great evening to talk to you guys, and when this goes out, I'll let you know. But Culbard, Dan, thank you very much.
Thank you for having us on.
Thank you.
We shall talk again soon. There we go, guys. I really enjoyed doing that interview. They were really fantastic to talk to. It was a great fun. Laughed a lot. Learned a lot. This is sort of the second time I've spoken with Culbard this year, and hopefully we might have Dan back at some point to talk about other things that he's done, probably around the Warcraft or the world, the 4K, 40K, isn't it? Anyway, more to that. Anyway, for now, if you like what we are doing and you want to see more of it, please leave a review on your podcast catcher, whatever you're listening on to now. Go on, leave a 4-star, 5-star, whatever you want to review. Just any feedback is good, and we greatly appreciate it. But if you really enjoy what we're doing and you want to help us keep the lights on at 20th Century Towers, go over to Patreon. We have a Patreon account on there. It's www.patreon.com/20, so that's 20 CG Media. There's a link down below in the notes. And we do all kinds of things on there. I do a 30 minutes thoughts. I'm joined by Julian to do our run through of the Twilight Zone, trekking through the Twilight Zone. And we have Creator Corner as well. So this is almost like a snippet of what Creator Corner could be. So, ladies and gentlemen, anyway, thank you very much for all your support and listening this year. And have a very Merry Christmas. And we shall see you again in the new year. Thanks very much.